Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to the second session of the Economic Sharia. If you recall, we had started studying the Economic Sharia from Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi's Meezan, the way he has understood and presented it. We had also discussed the fact that as far as his understanding of the Sharia is concerned, it is based on four principles. And these four principles or these four pillars of economic Sharia are the ones which he has explained. And we had started off with the first of these principles or the first of these pillars. And it was called consuming wealth through illegal means. And we had studied some of the various forms of this consumption which used to take place in the times of the Prophet. And some of them are still practiced today. So the bottom line is that all dealings which emanate from fraud or deceit or cause any harm or cause any infliction on the aggrieved party are all forbidden. And in this regard, we had studied gambling and had begun studying interest because these two especially are forms of consuming wealth through illegal means. And inshallah, we'll begin with this concept of interest and the way it has been described and condemned in the Quran as well. But before we do so, we had said that basically these principles or these statutes or these pillars themselves, they are four in number. So the first of them is the one that we are studying, this consumption of wealth through illegal means. The second relates to national assets, which means that wealth which cannot belong to an individual or assets which cannot belong to an individual must be kept in state authority so that the state can check its flow towards certain quarters, as a result of which money gets concentrated amongst the rich people. So the third statute or the third pillar of this Sharia relates to documentation and evidence, which means that whenever we do some transaction, maybe because of a loan, maybe we write some agreement between parties. So any sort of financial transaction between parties must be documented. And not only documented, we should also call in witnesses so that they are able to testify. And the fourth pillar of the economic Sharia relates to the distribution of inheritance, about which the Quran has given us very detailed guidance as to how we should distribute the shares of a person or the wealth of a person who has passed away. One more thing that we need to understand is that these are the four principles, and on the basis of these principles, the system of what is envisaged by the Quran vis-a-vis these four principles has to be put down by economists. It has to be developed by economists. As long as these four principles are upheld, this can be different. The system can be different in different periods of time. It could be even different in the same period of time, the same contemporary, I would say, time, in spite of the fact that the societies could be different, as long as these four principles are adhered to. So what we can say is that these principles are eternal. These are what we call the Sharia, the economic Sharia. They constitute the economic Sharia of Islam. And as far as the system which is going to be evolved from this economic Sharia is concerned, it will continue to develop and change various shapes, and it can also develop because as far as our societies are concerned, they do develop. There are changes which occur, but the principles, as I said, will always remain the same. So with this brief introduction, let's start off with the topic of interest, which, as I just alluded to, is a form of illegal consumption or aklul amwal bil batil. So the actual verse which the Quran has used in this regard is Ya ayyuhallazina amanu la ta'kulu amwalakum bil batil bainakum bil batil. They do not consume each other's wealth through illegal or unjustifiable means. So interest is a similar sin which morally pollutes a person, and it also it makes a person a weak person, a person who would not do that hard work which is important in life. And in Arabic it is called riba, and the Quran has used this very word for it. So interest, riba, these are synonymous words. The only thing is that the language is different. The Quran did not need to define the interest or riba because this is an age-old concept. And remember, the Quran is not a dictionary or it's not a book of terms at all. It uses terms which already exist in the society and either proscribes them or allows them. So as far as as interest is concerned, the Quran says that it is something which is not allowed, and interest actually constitutes a fixed increase in money to the lent amount to a borrower. And this is something which the Quran says should not be done, because it says that as far as the institution of lending is concerned, it should primarily be done for the welfare of people. In fact, the guidance provided by the Quran is that whatever you have spare, as far as your personal and business needs are concerned, whether they relate to the past or to the present or to the future, if you have money to spare from these needs, then it should inevitably be given away to the society. And the second best thing is to lend it to society for their means, and that is all. But to use this lending as a means of profit earning is something which the Quran does not recognize, and says that this is something which should totally be done away with. So everyone who understands Arabic knows that basically riba or interest implies an increase which a lender demands from the borrower just because he has given the permission to use his money for a certain period. So the Quran has vehemently and underscored the fact that it is absolutely prohibited. So the verse of the Quran that in this regard must be quoted and understood is now being displayed before you on your screen. So this is verse 275 of Surah Baqarah. It says, الذين يأكلون الربا لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا فمن جاءه موعظة من ربه فانتهى فله ما سلف وأمره إلى الله ومن عاد فأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. Those who devour interest will rise up on the day of judgment like the man whom Satan has driven to madness by his touch, because they claim that trading is like interest, and how strange it is that Allah has permitted trading and forbidden interest. Consequently, he who received this warning from the Almighty and desisted in obedience thereto, then whatever he has taken in the past belongs to him, and his fate is in the hands of Allah. And those who repeat the offense will be companions of the fire, and they will abide therein forever. And it is further stated right after this verse, a couple of verses after this verse, it says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wazaru ma baqiya min ar-riba in kuntum mu'minin. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَإِن تُبْتُمْ فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. Believers, fear Allah and give up what remains of your demand for interest. If you do it not, beware of war from Allah and His Prophet. And if you repent, then you can have your principal amount. Neither will you be allowed to deal unjustly, nor will you be dealt with unjustly. So this is very explicit. You can see how explicit it is that as far as consuming interest is concerned, it is absolutely prohibited. And the reason why devourers of interest will be raised up on the day of judgment as madmen owes itself to their expression of amazement on the fact that the Almighty has not prohibited trading while He has prohibited interest. And in their view, there is no difference between the two. They think that if a trader can demand profit on his capital, why can't a lender demand interest on the profit that he is making? So the Quran says that this analogy can only be drawn by a mad person. It is such an insane comparison that it needs no comment, and therefore the Quran is not commented on it. The fact that that money is lent, and on that lent money you gain profit, is so different from a profit that you gain from a capital which is invested, which of course bears all the risk of profit or loss, or it could end up in a situation that you completely lose your money. But in the case of interest, or in the case of lending, you don't lose your money, you always have the principal amount. And such is the stark difference that the Quran has not even commented on this, and it says that a person who thinks that these two are the same I mean, there's no comparison between the two, and that is why a person who says so, the fact that it is the same. It says that the Quran says that only a madman can say this. So the reason why devourers of interest will be raised up on the day of judgment is because of this amazement on the fact that while interest is prohibited, why is that? Why is that profit on capital is allowed, and there is no difference between the two? So such is the variance between the two that only a madman can say this. So in this regard, what is also to be understood is that as far as the interest itself is concerned, it has to be understood that it is something which is not only found today, it existed in all periods of time. And the objection raised by the interest devourers, that the breed of people who regard interest and trading as analogous to one another, is not very rare at all. So the Quran has not even commented on this foolish inference. And obviously, we know that a trader invests his capital in trade, which is in demand from the people. He makes his merchandise available to people through hard work and by taking a lot of risk. And these people in the first place were not in a position to procure this merchandise themselves. And if they are able to do it, then it was only at a heavy cost. So a trader can never be analogous to an interest lender. Such is the stark difference between the two. So in this regard, we also need to understand that as far as the Quran is concerned, it has only prohibited the charging of interest. It has not permitted anywhere or prohibited anywhere the paying of interest. But we know that as a natural consequence of this prohibition, a person who without any genuine reason makes someone devour interest must be regarded as an equal criminal on the basis of the Quranic verse that we cannot cooperate with evil. La ta'awanu alal ism. It is said that we just cannot do it. So in this regard, there is this narrative of the Prophet which needs to be understood, because people think that just as consuming interest is forbidden, the paying of interest is also forbidden. So you can see, my dear listeners and participants of this session, that in the Quran, wherever interest has been discussed on 3 or 4 occasions, not at a single place, not at one place has the Quran ever said that interest, paying of interest is prohibited. At all times, in all instances, wherever interest is discussed, you will find aklu riba, which is the consumption or the charging of interest, which is prohibited. Now, of course, the fact that people still think that paying of interest is also forbidden, then we need to understand that this is a concept which is alien to the Quran. Yes, there is a narrative which says so. And I would like to I'd like to quote that narrative before you so that we are able to understand it and see that what it actually means. So you have this narrative now being displayed before you. It says, La'an Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam akil riba wa mukilahu. The Prophet has severely condemned the devourer of interest and the one who makes someone devour interest, devour interest of the interest devourer. So this is something which the Prophet has of course prohibited, and we need to understand that this is something that must be understood in its proper perspective. So in this narrative, the word mukil is used. Mukil is used for a person who makes others consume interest. So linguistically, it can refer to a person who pays interest, and also to a person who, as agents of professional lenders and in this capacity, hunt for potential customers for their masters. So the point that should be understood is that the word mukil can mean the person who pays interest, which is generally understood by most scholars, and the other meaning is that it means those agents of professional lenders who help those professional lenders by bringing in various customers to their masters. So if lending on interest becomes a business, then such agents are its essential need. So you need people to bring various people to you so that you can lend on interest. This was something that went on in the past when the institution of interest had started. Without them, the business of lending interest bearing loans cannot be run. People need to be brought to an interest lender so that they are able to fulfill their need. So if the narrative relates to such people, then there is no complexity in the narrative, because this is blatant cooperation with evil. As agents of interest lenders, those who prepare agreements and documents for them and act as witnesses, their matter is no different. So if this is the meaning, that basically the word mukil refers to agents of interest lenders, then it can only be understood because every person who is going to aid an interest lender is going to be culpable for the crime, because he is cooperating with an evil business. But people who acquire interest-based loans can not in any way be regarded as guilty of cooperation with evil. This would be a very far cry. You just cannot say that because you are acquiring interest, a loan on interest, so you are cooperating with the institution of interest itself. So this expression can only be used for an act done by perpetrators of a sin and those who reap the benefits of this sin. Those who acquire interest-based loans do not acquire it to help the devourers of interest. It's not that they are doing it to help people in this regard, but they obtain loan for their own personal and business needs. So this cannot be termed cooperation in any way. Now, if the word mukil is used to mean the pair of interest, then this can only be understood in this narrative when interest has been prohibited at the state level and all forms of interest transactions are brought to an end. Then, of course, we will say that just as paying of interest is concerned and charging of interest is concerned, it is absolutely the same. So if the hadith narrative cited above or just referred to refers to them, then the directive should relate to the scenario just stated, that when interest transactions had been totally prohibited in the time of the Prophet. So let me just summarize this view once again, that the word mukil is the word of contention. So there can be two meanings of the word mukil. It could be used as agents of interest devourers. They would help the lenders. They would bring customers to the lenders, and as such, they would actually cooperate, or they would help these interest lenders to lend, and therefore they would be also called mukil. So these agents are called mukil, which means people who are agents of the interest lender. And in this case, of course, this is something that would relate to people who, of course, in no way can be, they cannot be let go scot-free. They will be involved in this business because this would be like cooperating with the person who is the money lender. And if the word mukil is to mean paying of interest, then this can only relate to that scenario when the charging and the paying of interest has been prohibited at the state level and the times of the Prophet. And now if a person indulges in whether he charges interest or pays interest, then in both cases, he shall be culpable for the crime and shall be taken to task. So this is what we have to understand. However, in these normal circumstances of today, when interest transactions are going on the way they are, and interest, although has been prohibited, at least at the state level through a state decree, but this is something which most in many countries, especially our own country, Pakistan, we are grappling with this question that in practicality, this is still operational. So in this particular society in which interest is still operational, the word mukil cannot be used for people who pay riba. It can only be used for people who actually are who help people or who help lenders, who help money lenders who lend on interest, and they bring in customers to them. Like, for example, as I said, people who write a document for them, people who bear witness for them, or the other staff of a bank which helps the money lending business. So this is very important to understand. The second important thing that we also need to understand here is that as far as interest is concerned, there are people who think that in olden times, business interest was not prevalent. And they generally thought that basically interest was just given for personal consumption. Now, this is again an erroneous consumption. The Quran has actually given this indication elsewhere that in many parts of Arabia, interest was actually not just for personal loans, it was also for commercial loans. So you can see at one instance, the Quran has quoted this, and I'm just going to read this verse before you. This is verse 39 of Surah Rum, the 30th Surah. I'm just going to read the translation. And that which you give as loan on interest, that it may increase on other people's wealth. So this is a very important sentence that we have to note. And that which you give as loan on interest, that it may increase on other people's wealth, it has no increase with God. But that which you give as zakat, seeking Allah's countenance, then it is these people who shall get manyfold in their hereafter of what they gave. So you can clearly see, dear viewers, that here the words, it may increase on other people's wealth, is not at all appropriate for application to interest-based loans given to the poor for their personal use. It is a clear evidence to the fact that interest-based loans were generally given for business purposes also in olden times. Because you see, the words are that it may increase on other people's wealth. So this can only be used as far as as those loans are concerned, which we can clearly see are they are based on business purposes. So people in those times would take those loans, they would buy merchandise from that borrowed money, and then they would indulge in business and trade. So the point being is that interest in olden times was for both purposes. It was for commercial purposes also, for business lending, and also for personal purposes as well. So this has to be understood in all times. And also you can see the Quranic verse that I'm just going to quote before you or cite before you. This also is a very apt verse which tells us that in those times it was basically business interest which was more common. So the words are, and if the borrower is in difficulty, grant him respite until it is easy for him to repay. And if you write off the debt, it is better for you if you only knew. So, I mean, this is an important area, and it is here that Ustaz Amin and Islahi had made a very important point while referring to Ustaz Hamiduddin Farai. He says the word "in" has to be understood, and this is something that is generally used on special circumstances, not on general circumstances. The word "iza" is used in general circumstances. So, in kana zu usratin would mean that if a borrower is in difficulty, grant him respite. So, of course, this is something which categorically states that he should be given respite until he's able to pay back its debt. It clearly points out that in those times, even the rich used to acquire loans. In fact, as I said, if the style and stress of the verse are correctly understood, it becomes clear that it was mostly the rich who used to procure loans because the money lender, therefore, is directed to give him more time. And if he forgoes the original amount, it would be better. And as I said, the difference is the word "in" and "iza." So the word "in," which is the particle of condition, is not used for general circumstances. It is only used for rare and unusual circumstances. For general circumstances, the particle "iza" is used for, so that if had it been a general circumstance, then the verse would have been "wa iza kana zu usratin." But because it is "in," this is a clear evidence that borrowers in those times were generally affluent, zu maisra, but in some cases had become poor or were poor after acquiring the loan, and in that case, the Quran has directed the money lenders to give them a time rebate. And so, therefore, the words "iza" and "in" make it very, very clear to us that in those times, money lending was in fact more related to business lending. So this is something of a very important discussion that we have to understand. Now comes another important aspect of interest, which is basically more academic in its understanding. But the reason that we have to study it is, and the reason is that people have now actually come up with a new form of interest. And that form is called the ribal fazl. Ribal fazl means that something, the interest which is based on the spot transaction. So we know as far as the Quran is concerned and as far as the Hadiths are concerned, that as far as interest is concerned, it is only when you lend money. It cannot be on the spot transactions. For example, transactions which are made on the spot, in which there's no loan, there's no time involved. And therefore, the Prophet is emphatically directed that people should refrain from the slightest possible trace of interest while borrowing in barter as well. So when they are borrowing in barter, and that should also be something that has to be refrained from. So just let me cite this from the Prophet himself, the way he has narrated it, and he has said that in fact we have to understand that الذهب بالذهب وزنا بوزن مثلا بمثل والفضة بالفضة وزنا بوزن مثلا بمثل فمن زاد واستزاد فهو الربا. If you lend gold, then you take back the same type and the same amount of gold. And if you lend silver, then you take back the same amount, the same type of silver. For he who gave more or desired more, then this is precisely what interest is. So if you are lending in barter, then the Quran says that you must take back the same amount and same type. And then you take back the same amount, because if you do it more than that, then interest is bound to result in this case. And the second directive, which is of course something very similar to it, and that is that if you lend gold in exchange for silver, then there is possibility of interest in this. Similarly, for wheat in exchange of another type of wheat, barley in exchange for another type of barley, and date for another type of date. Indeed, if the exchange is done on the spot, then there is no harm. So the two important things are that as far as you do it hand by hand on the spot transactions, and if they are of different assets or different commodities, it has to be on the spot. But if you do it on loan, then you must take back the same amount. You just cannot, conjecture that, well, this is the amount that I'm lending, and after maybe some time, the same amount I'm going to get back, because you just cannot have that equal division in mind, and there is bound that the element of interest might creep in. So the Prophet has said that in barter transactions, this must be kept in mind. But today, as I said, this is more of an academic interest only, because barter transactions they don't go on today. It's basically currency that is being used. But in the times of the Prophet, this was something that he expressly wanted people not to indulge in. So he said that as far as interest is concerned, when you're borrowing, and if you have gold, then you must take back the same amount of gold and of the same type. So when you are borrowing, then don't exchange the metal with something else, because if you say that I'm borrowing gold and I'm going to take back that gold in silver, then because of a lack of precise measurements, this could always result in the fact that you take back more than you lend. So the Prophet emphatically said that whatever commodity that you lend, you must take the same commodity back, not some other commodity. And the other thing that he said was that in barter, if you are lending one type of one type of commodity in exchange for the other type of commodity, then it is essential that you do it on the spot. Don't indulge in a loan. Don't do it for a period of time, because again, interest will creep in. But as I said, we needed to understand this as far as the Prophet's own direction is concerned, because these were issues which did exist in his own times. And because of the fact that most scholars, according to Ustaz, had not been able to gauge this fact that this is something which related to barter, and this also was the result of not understanding certain narratives in which words were mixed up, in which certain words were taken from one narrative and inserted into the other narrative. And the result was that instead of to loan, it became on the spot transaction. And it became something like the fact that if you're going to sell gold and take the same amount of gold in exchange for that, of course, no one would do that. So barter system. Why would I sell my gold and take back the same gold from the opposite person? So this was purely by not understanding the fact that the actual purport of the Prophet was that if you are sending or selling one type of gold or one type of grain in exchange for the other type of grain. So this is an issue which he has resolved in his treatise, Meezan. People who'd like to know more about it can consult his book, but primarily, as I said, it is more a question of academic importance that has resolved. But what has happened today is that because of not understanding this directive, a whole new form of interest, which is interest on the spot or ribal fuzzle, has arisen, and this is a form of interest which is found on the spot transactions. But as we know, that interest only is in the form of loan. It does not happen on the spot transactions, and that is why the Prophet has said, "Innama riba fi nisya," which means that loan only, interest is only on transactions of loan. On the spot transactions, does not incur any riba. So, as I said, this is something that has been resolved by stars in this manner. Now we come to the second important area or the second pillar, I would say, of our economic Sharia, and this is what we call national assets. And you can see the verse being displayed before you. This actually is something which tells us that as far as public wealth is concerned, this public wealth cannot be given to the use of, it cannot be given to private people in their private capacities, because if you start doing this, then wealth is going to definitely accumulate in one part of the society. The rich will get more rich. So public property or public wealth must remain in the hands of the government, and therefore this is a national asset. And he has derived this understanding from the following Quranic verse, which I'm just going to read out. This is verse 7 of Surah Hashr, the 59th surah of the Quran. It says, "Ma afa Allahu ala rasulihi min ahli al-qura falillahi wa lirrasul wa lizil qurba wal yatama wal masakini wa ibn as-sabil kay la yakuna dulatan bayna al-aghniya'i minkum." Whatever the Almighty has bestowed on His Prophet from the people of the cities, it is reserved for Allah and His Prophet and the relatives of the Prophet, and the orphans and the needy and the wayfarers, so that it may not circulate, only among the rich, only the rich among you. And you can see that as far as people are concerned who have qualms about the fact that the concentration of wealth is something which goes on unchecked in our society, then it is here that we need to understand that the primary reason for this is what the Quran has pointed out here, that wealth will definitely go and concentrate itself in the hands of the rich if what is publicly owned is given in private ownership. So this is something which Ustaz has derived. The context of the verse is that in Prophet's times, when people demanded that the wealth, land, and assets obtained from the enemy against whom no war had been waged be distributed among them, the Quran refused this demand. So basically, the Quran said that whatever people have gained, or whatever the Islamic State has gained because of war in the form of wealth, land, and assets, people said, well, why, in accordance with the custom, this should be distributed among the soldiers and the people who fought. The Quran refused this demand, and it asserted that these assets and this wealth belongs to God and Prophet, and they are reserved for the collective requirements of the state and religion, and for the poor and needy. This, according to the Quran, was necessary so that wealth should not get concentrated among the rich, and that it be directed to those sectors of the society which, because of their natural disabilities and lack of resources, are unable to struggle for their livelihood, or for some reason are left far behind others in earning for themselves. This is very important to understand. So wealth and assets referred to in this verse, actually, they were obtained without any real assistance from the believers, merely through the wealth, through the help of the Almighty. So the fare, or this wealth in which believers did not play any role, it just came to them as a result of the awe that they inspired in the enemies, is something which belonged just to God and His Prophet. And the spoils of war obtained in the times of the Prophet in various battles fought in Arabia were also earned by the Prophet. Because of the peculiar nature of these armed offenses, however, since the believers had also assisted in acquiring them by using their personal weapons and camels and horses and tents and whatnot, it was essential that the spoils be distributed among them. Nevertheless, even in these spoils, the Quran reserved 1/5 of the share for collective purposes. So you see, it says, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمَسَهُ وَلِلرَّسُولِ وَلِذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ. And you should know that 1/5 of the spoils you get hold of are for God and the Prophet and his near relatives and the orphans and the needy and the wayfarer. So you see, that these verses provide a specific guidance to every collective system of the Muslims. They say that wealth and assets which are not in the ownership of an individual or cannot be in his ownership, like the land and its treasures, should remain in the ownership of the nation, so that besides fulfilling some other needs of the state through them, they are directed to those sectors of the society which are dependent for their needs. That this is something we have to understand. And as far as its details are concerned, we know that, for example, in the times of Caliph Umar, he imposed kharaj on various lands. He did not give them in private ownership. He said that, well, whatever you own, yes, you will have it for your own self. Your progeny will even inherit it. It remain in your family, but you will have to pay a fixed kharaj, or you can call it rent, on the land that you have. So, in accordance with this, if today we impose this rent on all the land that exists in a state, and not give it in the possession of people, then this would be absolutely fine, because the land itself, the land of the whole country belongs to the state. So whatever private ownership a person has is still not as private as we think. Yes, he will own the land, but he will still pay a stipulated amount of that land, or the rent of that land, to the state. So every person who owns some piece of land is basically is owning that piece of land because of the state giving it to that person. And as a result of that, all this land which is acquired by people, they can pay this, or they have to pay this kharaj, or the word kharaj, of course, means a stipulated amount of rent that they have to pay to the government. And this, dear viewers, would also bring to light one very important source of income for the state as well. So just as the system of zakat is a very efficient system in which a lot of revenue can be generated for the state as tax, because we know, as we will study, inshallah, elsewhere, that zakat is not just 2.5%, it has other ratios as well. So this is one form of income as far as the state is concerned. The other form of income is this kharaj, or this rent on the land, which can be imposed on all lands which people own, whether they are in agricultural lands or personal lands, because basically the earth or the land belongs to the state. It's a collective. It's in the ownership of the state. So people use it, and they can use it, and they can transfer it to their descendants, but it will remain state property. And this is what Caliph Umar did when the lands of Syria and Iraq in his times were conquered. He refused to give them in private ownership when he was asked to. He said, well, yes, you shall remain its owners in the sense that you will till the soil, or you'll own it and earn the profit, and it will go on to your next generations as well. But you'll have to pay a fixed amount of rent on that land that you own, or that will be given in your ownership, and that fixed amount of rent in his times was called kharaj. So by analogy, if this kharaj is imposed today on lands that people have, of course, it has to be judicious, it has to be just, then that amount is also going to count towards a source of state income. So if the kharaj is earned through these lands, and at the same time zakat is properly implemented, one can clearly see that the amount of resource and income which will be at the disposal of a Muslim or Islamic state would be substantial, and hopefully this would not need any deficit, any budget of deficit to be made. It would be a budget in which you would be generating that income from within your own resources. So I will end my discussion here. Until now we have finished two pillars of the economic Sharia. One of them is the consumption of wealth through illegal means. We have studied under that various transactions, and in particular gambling and interest. And the second is what we call the national assets, or the fact that all those things which are in the property of or in the ownership of the state must remain in the ownership of the state. It can be given to private individuals on rent, and this is as far as it can go, but it can never be transferred totally in their ownership. And this, as a result, would mean that a certain amount of rent would be imposed on that rented out on that land which has been given to them. which would then count towards state income. So now we will, inshallah, in our future sessions of economic Sharia, we will discuss the remaining two pillars of the economic Sharia. One of them is the concept of evidence and documentation whenever some transaction is made, and the other one relates to the distribution of inheritance.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our first question asks, in Arabic, the word in means if, and the word iza means when. Is that accurate?
It's not accurate. I mean, these were some of the these are called particles or huruf in Arabic, and they have different meanings. So in and iza are used synonymously as well. So when, and if in the English language, the word when can be used synonymously for in and iza.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, this rent of the ownership or the kharaj is 1/5, so like 20% per the ayah.
Right. So let me explain this. This was something which was in the times of the Prophet when the Almighty Himself intervened, and as a result of the law of Itmamul Hujjah, which we have been discussing in some of the other sessions, it was basically the soldiers whose own assets were used, and so therefore 4/5 of the spoils of war were given to them, and 1/5 was owned by the state. So today this is not the situation anymore. We now have standing armies, and the wars are not fought on the basis of God's help that is given to God's messengers as a result of the tasks that they are assigned. Today these are normal wars that are conducted, and because of the fact that the soldiers are not using their own assets like their camps or their camels or their horses, but it is being provided by the state. So whatever spoils of war that will be gathered as a result of a war, if it happens, would belong to the state. So it's not just 1/5; it will be all these, all the amount. 1/5, as I said, was in the times of the Prophet because of the peculiar nature of those wars. One, that they were fought at the behest of the Almighty with His help for the realization of a certain mission, and two, because people were using their own assets, I mean their own camels and their horses and their weapons for fighting. This is no longer the case. Now they are provided by the state itself. So now whatever the spoils of war are, whenever they are gained, they shall all end up in public treasury.
So would that also include, could it also include commercial or industrial land instead of just, residential properties?
Yes, all sorts of land. Because you see, land is not just what you think is on the surface. I mean, when you give something to people, land is like is a deep chunk of thing. So what we are thinking of is just the horizontal part of the land. Basically, what God has given us is that horizontal and the vertical part, and we are just using that horizontal part. So basically, this land, but whether it's the commercial property, whether it's private property, any sort of property, someone is going to own it. And whoever is going to own it should think that basically it is something that has been given to them in their possession. Of course, they are, I mean, in a certain I would say format, they are its owners, but not in the sense they are its entire owners, because this land in fact belongs to the state. It has been given in the ownership of people on the condition that they will pay a certain amount of rent. And this could be forever. I mean, this could go on forever, and it could go on in their own generations, unless, of course, they breach some contract or flout some rule. Otherwise, it's going to stay with them. But on the condition that kharaj or that tribute they must pay to the state.
So in the cases of, for example, what the Pakistani government does with the Bahriya town or the DHA, where the government is typically selling its land to private property developers, does that mean that they're doing something wrong, or they shouldn't be doing that?
It's not just in Pakistan. I mean, this is all over the world. I mean, this concept has yet to be recognized. I can say that since the times of Caliph Umar, when he took this bold step. So you see, Syria and Iraq were no small areas. They were huge countries in his times. All of Syria and all of Iraq, they got conquered in his times. And the people said that we, the conquerors, should be given this, or we, the tillers of the soil, should be given this ownership. And he refused, and he said that this belongs to the state. And because it belongs to the state, yes, you can use it, but you cannot own it in the absolute sense. So taking cue from that, what we now understand is that it's not just in the third world country like Pakistan, it's all over the world, wherever Muslims are settled. They need to understand that this is a means of income for a state, that whatever land people have, whether they are residential lands or commercial lands or lands that are given to them because of inheritance, because they just own it, because their forefathers owned it. In all such instances, if you have to implement this condition, then from one time onwards, there should be an equitable rent imposed on all sorts of land. I say equitable because, of course, commercial lands will have a different sort of imposition, and residential lands will have a different form of imposition. And let me remind you, this is more like property tax that we are also aware of these days. I mean, property tax, the way it is taxed is, of course, has a similar ring to it, has a similar concept to it. So kharaj is like a property tax. So whether you own it on a commercial basis or on a private basis, the way we pay this property tax to our governments, it's exactly the same thing. It's analogous to that, I would say.
Thank you, Dr.
And once it is done, you would not need to have that property tax.
Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Saleem. I would like to remind all the participants that we're only taking the questions related to our topic right now, which is on economic Sharia. If you have other questions, if we have time towards the end, we can take those. Riaz, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sahab.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Dr. Sahab, the way you are explaining it, it means, that the oil wells or anything which are in the Middle East, they belong to the state, and
Yes,
it should not be spent on a royal family, all the revenues.
absolutely.
Oh, okay. Thank you, sir.
Asif Ali, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sahab.
Wa alaikum assalam.
My question is that the modern economic system is quite complex, and the financial transactions are quite complex right now. So, for example, the banking system is not easy to understand for a common person. The person who is working in a bank, the bank itself is not doing any business. They are investing in, for example, in other corporate sectors and everywhere. But itself, they are not doing any business, and they're earning their revenue with mainly interest. So the working in a bank, how it will fit into the mokil according to the hadith?
Right. So, of course, people who are, aiding interest-based transactions, the staff of the bank, especially, they are, in fact, cooperating with this business. But there are some more details that we must realize, that banking today is so much different from the banking that used to take place. Today, basically, this banking itself is not. It has now more of a ring of a financing institution in which money is financed, and it is more on the basis of principal secured transactions that money is being lent. So once a corporation declares itself to be bankrupt, the whole interest or the charging of interest is stopped from it, and only when the business is run in profit is that that interest being charged. So what we need to understand is that modern banking, although it uses the word interest, it has moved far away from the word interest itself. It is now more of financing of assets or financing of businesses that is being used. The only thing is that the terminology is still the terminology used is still the former terminology in which you use the word interest. Whereas I think the nature of banking now has gone far beyond that, and it is now more of a financial institution than just a lending institution. So the second important thing is that when you are financing an asset, what you do is that you are not even, you're not even lending money, you're financing an asset. For example, when you are financing a car or a house, in that case, the asset comes into existence. And as a result, the extra amount which the person pays is more of rent on that asset than the interest payment itself. So what I'm saying is that basically the instruments that now we see in our banks, they have moved far away from their own terms. Yes, on one occasion they were very close to what they represented, but now they seem to move far away, and therefore we need some shuffling of these terms. And if we do so in certain, and we make certain changes in our current banking system, we don't need to introduce any Islamic banking separately. Current banks can operate as Islamic banks or as legitimate banks, and that is all. So if those a couple of changes are made, for example, if asset financing is the word used, is asset financing, and whatever asset you finance and the amount over and above that you charge should not be called interest. It should be called as rent, because basically you are giving that house to a person, and until it becomes on the ownership of that person, the extra amount that he is paying is actually amounting to the rent of that asset, whether it's a car or a house. The second thing is that as soon as a business declares itself that it is not profitable, no demand of rent of interest should be made. If that is the case, and which is the case in most banks today, then of course this objection is also done away with. Thirdly, personal consumption of loans which are given for personal consumption should be interest free. They should be given for the purpose of helping out people, whether it is in the ambit of the bank or not. And fourthly, one of the big instruments of banking today is credit cards. So these credit cards, they charge interest once you cross that stipulated period in which you have to pay back that amount. So instead of calling that interest, all that we need to do is change the name of interest and call it a penalty. So if a person is lent money, I mean, he's borrowed money from the bank, and he said, okay, I'm going to buy this product and I'm going to return you this money until such a date, let's say 1 month from that transaction. So in today's time, what happens is that once that 1 month expires, a particular amount of interest is imposed. So instead of imposing interest, what can be done is you impose a penalty, which is absolutely legitimate, because that's the penalty for not paying your loan back on time. So if these 3 or 4 changes are made, the current banking system is compatible to a greater extent to what Islam itself wants. And this actually is something which does away with the need of having a separate Islamic desk for every bank. Today, we know that all banks have a common banking or a banking which is the conventional standard banking, and the other is the Islamic desk that every bank has. So that would not be required in any case if these changes are made.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Nagar, please go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. If I lended somebody 1 million about 10 years ago,
Right.
for the business purpose, and that person did the business for one year, and then he took all the money and just settled in Dubai, and he just signed a contract with me, given the checks and everything. So what I need to do with that person?
So, I mean, you have lent the money and he has not given you back that money?
No, I invested the money with him in some business. He did the business
Okay.
for 1 year, and then after that, he just wind up the business and settled in Dubai now.
So you see, you have to refer to the contract that you made with him. If the contract was of a loan, I mean, in that case, the principal amount should be paid back to you, because when you lend money, the principal amount has to be the same. But in that case, you will be earning interest. However, when you invest money, so investment means that investment can undergo losses or profits, as the case may be. So you need to refer to that agreement. What is the agreement that you made, and what would be the result if the whole business is just wound up, as is the case that you've just referred to. So you see, when you make an investment, there is an agreement that you generally make, and the agreement provides you with all these solutions that whenever the business is ended, how should the money be distributed, or what should be your share. So I think you should refer to the agreement that you made with him, if you did so.
The agreement was a simple one, like that he will do the business and he will pay some return on it. But now he's agreed that he has done the mistake and he used the money. So where I'm standing now?
I mean, then again, you see what important thing was left out was the agreement was not completely made. I mean, it should have been made in a complete way, in which not only the investment part, but the part that if there are losses, and if the business would be finished, how the distribution would be made. This had to be written originally. Now that you have not written it originally, now it will be left to your own understanding and the way that the person that you are involved with takes the situation. If he thinks that he has made a mistake and he has to pay you back certain amount, then well, you have to accept whatever he can do for you. Otherwise, my advice was that whenever you whenever you invest money with a party, then all these details have to be written down prior to that investment. But unfortunately, in your case, this has not been done. So it has to be your mutual understanding of a certain inference or a certain consequence that should then finally settle the affairs.
Now, because of the interest point of view, if I demand because I remember that the agreement for 2 years, that in 2 years' time he will return the money. Now, what I can demand now after 1 year, like 10 years?
You see, I cannot say anything in this regard unless I know more details and also the understanding of your partner. So this is a dispute that has arisen, and I just cannot give you a comment without studying in detail what your understanding was and what his understanding was. Because you see, at the moment, you're telling me your understanding. So I need to hear what he understood so that I can give a fair comment.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Saleem, my question is about the interest on credit card for buying the groceries. For example, there is no, actual thing has changed the hand. It's not like a car or the house. So would the interest would be allowed on that?
As I said, you see, the paying of interest is something which is never disallowed. It is only disallowed once interest has been prohibited. Paying of interest and charging of interest is prohibited at a state level. This is not the case in most countries. So in that case, if you pay extra money on your credit card for buying your groceries or anything, if you cross that time and you have to pay that money, then what you're doing is that you're not charging interest, you are paying interest. And I just explained earlier on in our session earlier that as far as charging interest is concerned, that is not allowed. But when you're paying interest, that is something which is not disallowed. I mean, it's like a penalty that that is being imposed on you.
But is it acceptable for the person? For example, the credit card owners or the bank.
Well, for them it's interest. For them, they are charging interest. So if it's not acceptable unless they change the term and say that, well, this is not interest and this is a penalty, and the way that we'll calculate this penalty is this and this. It should not be based on the amount and the interest that you calculate on it. So if the credit card company or the bank says that when you cross this limit, then there will be a penalty imposed for the first 10 days, and for the next 15 days, the penalty would increase, the way we do it in many other transactions. So if that is not done, then the bank or the credit company will be guilty of charging interest, which is, of course, forbidden for them, unless, of course, as I said, that they change the term and the concept as well.
So it doesn't matter whether you are buying a car or you are just buying the groceries. The principle
is same. Matter. No, yeah, okay. Because you see, when you're buying a car, in that case, you are buying an asset. When you're buying groceries and you are paying interest over and above the amount that you have borrowed, is like a penalty that you are paying to them. So, as I said, for them it is unacceptable because they are charging interest. But for you to pay interest is something which the Quran never forbade.
So for them, accepting the money for the car is okay, but not for the groceries. I am trying
not
to
for the groceries. That. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a written question that asks, they want to confirm their understanding of Ghamidi Sahib's opinion, which is that it's not a problem for wealthy people to remain wealthy or even become more wealthy, but it is a problem that wealth should not keep being distributed amongst the rich only.
Well, there is a slight modification in this statement, and that is that it's basically God who has created this system of the world in such a way that certain people will remain rich and there are certain people who will remain poor. However, for the distribution of the wealth in which the rich don't become extremely rich, the Quran says that property or assets or wealth which are publicly owned or which should be publicly owned, they must not be given in private ownership. Otherwise, in this case, the rich will become much more rich and the poor will become much more poor. And the other important thing is that whether you are rich or whether you are poor, opportunities should be given in the equal sense. And the system must be based on merit and not on the basis of the fact that who is able to reach the upper echelons of a society. So if these three statutes are kept in mind, one of them is natural. You just cannot create a stateless and a classless society. This is just a dream of communism that it dreamt. The Almighty himself has created these various classes, as we saw earlier on, that they are meant so that each of these classes can serve the other people. We need the tillers of the soil, we need academicians, we need laborers, we need artisans, and at the same time we need artists. And so these are various sections of society, and each section is dependent on the other. We just cannot eliminate this class difference. What can be done, as I said, is that opportunities should be equal, the system has to be based on merit, and thirdly, national assets cannot be given in private ownership.
Thank you for that, Dr. Saleem. We've run out of on-topic questions, so we can take two off-topic questions. The first one asks whether the last generation will also die before the Day of Judgment.
So what we understand is that on the Day of Judgment, whoever will remain by the time that last thunder takes place, or the last earthquake, as the Quran says, will take place, of course, they'll be made to die at that time. So near that time, everyone would be everyone would be dead. So either all the generations would be dead before that time comes, or the ones that would be living would face death at the time of the advent of the Day of Judgment.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, worse reading, if you could please comment on it. Are worse readers mistaken Muslims? How can we correct them? And can we form matrimonial relations with them?
You see, worse reading, it all depends at how you view at this whole issue. Because this is a very vast area of Quranic understanding in which most people believe in variant readings, and they think that all these are legitimate readings. So people who think they are legitimate, of course, I would say that they can go on and marry amongst such people, and they have, all sorts of relations. They are all Muslims. Even if they don't agree with them, even then they can do it. But if you ask me academically, I would say yes, these variant readings have arisen because of certain misconceptions and by not understanding certain stipulations which the Prophet or the Quran had provided. And ultimately, they become a whole class of reading the Quran, a whole category or a whole type of system in which you could read the Quran in a different way. So I have done a lot of work in this area. You can refer to the questionnaire to my lectures on this topic. But as I said, this would be my academic opinion. I would not say that they are mistaken in the sense that they are sinners and they'll be punished by God. I would say that they have committed an honest mistake, and I don't think at all that people would be called to account for honest mistakes.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Regarding the question before about the Day of Judgment, someone is asking, would that also include animals?
I assume so. Because the Quran says that on the Day of Judgment, all living beings will die, will perish.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions today. Inshallah, see you tomorrow in another session of textual study of the Quran. And until then, Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, wa alaikum assalam.